And I would just some very quick logistics. So if you have any questions as we go, please enter them into the chat box. Any clarifications, I will ask Gordon pretty much straight away. And any larger questions, we will wait until at the end of the questions that I'll be asking Gordon to cover those off as well. We'll end at about 10:45. The next session will start in the same Zoom room in at the next hour at 11 o'clock. So please keep yourselves on mute, but love for you to actually keep your videos on so we can see all the lovely people that we are speaking to. So welcome, Gordon.
Hi, everybody.
So, quickly, Gordon Renouf is the CEO and co-founder of Good On You, the global sustainability rating system for fashion brands that was started here in Australia. Even before that, he's been a consumer advocate for 30 years, including as head of campaigns at Choice, a board member of Consumers International, deputy chair of the Consumers Federation of Australia, and he's also served as director and chair of the environmental certification scheme, Good Environmental Choice Australia. So welcome. And I think Good On You is the current focus of your time. So can you tell us a bit about what the app is, what the platform is all about, and what drove you to start it up?
I guess if we start from our vision, which is of a world where consumer choices influence brands to be sustainable and fair, very strongly influenced by Sustainable Development Goal 12, Sustainable Systems of Production and Consumption, and trying to make that an actual real possibility for consumers. So we start from the point of view that consumers, a large percentage of them are interested in making more sustainable and ethical consumer choices, but that it's fairly difficult to do that. And most of them don't want to spend a lot of effort and time doing so. And so it's got to be as easy as possible. So the whole point of Good On You is to make it as easy as possible for people to determine which brands or products are most in alignment with their values around sustainability, ethical production, animal welfare, and so forth. And I guess another key insight is that unlike a certification scheme, which of course are very important and have their place, consumers, if you think about fashion, when you decide to make a consumption choice, a purchase, a rental, a secondhand purchase, you are fulfilling a precise need that you have, whether that's a practical need or an identity need or something like that. And you're not going to be satisfied if you're limited to a very tiny proportion of brands that have a certification of some sort. So you basically need to know the relative performance of every brand that you could possibly be exposed to if you're going to really have it as easy as possible to choose which is best. And we also, I guess, accept that consumers are making trade-offs. They're making trade-offs between their sustainability values on one hand, their convenience, being able to find what they want, price, of course, and many other, factors which go into making every consumption decisions that we make. So, so we started about 5 or 6 years ago, and the idea was to develop a ratings methodology that could be applied regardless of whether the brand wanted to participate or not, to every brand in the world in a particular sector. We chose fashion for various reasons, and perhaps one day we will extend that to other verticals.
Certainly. And it's amazing that over the course of 6 years, I believe, the app has gone from basically a little idea here in Australia to being adopted globally, and even being having some amazing partners on board, and your celebrity spokesperson.
Yes, yes. So, I mean, our primary mission is to provide information to consumers, and so maybe 4 million people accessed our properties last year. Some of them briefly, admittedly, but many of them come back repeatedly. And but we also work with brands and with retailers of brands and indeed other platforms. And so because we are a business, we have to have customers, and for users, access to good on you information is obviously free because that's important to achieving our mission. And so we work with we have two ways of working with customers. One is that we provide typically larger retailers with data about which brands are more sustainable, and that influences their decision about what brands to stock. Influences how they communicate which brands are sustainable to their customers. So here we work with Farfetch, which is a global luxury and affordable luxury fashion platform listed in New York, based in London. A German retailer that is about to launch a new sustainable only multi-brand retail platform in Europe, and indeed with Afterpay, which is not a fashion retailer but a fintech, but has an ethical fashion area on its merchant database, on its list, which consumers use to choose where to shop. Excuse me. The second thing we do is we do work with more sustainable brands based on our rating system and to connect them with our user base. So about 90 brands and retailers, again, including the world's largest secondhand platform, which is Vestia Collective, and a European retailer called Louisa Via Roma, but then a whole lot of other brands from Beauty Jeans and Armed Angels, Outland Denim, and many others that work with us to reach our user base. So yeah, it's coming along after 6 years. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes. And Emma Watson was the celebrity that I was forgetting her name at the minute. In case anyone
Emma Watson is a very strong committed to sustainable fashion and agreed to work with us to get the word out about what consumers could do to make more sustainable fashion choices.
Yeah, awesome. So in that 6 and more years, how have you seen the demand and buying behavior of users and consumers generally change over that time?
Well, I mean, I think there's always been a latent interest in being more sustainable. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of they're out of my head, Andy Baker and Nick. Now, what is their company called? But anyway, Mobium, their research into lifestyles of health and sustainability. I mean, there's this very strong 50% of people who are strongly emotionally engaged in the idea of making more ethical and sustainable choices. And that number has gradually come up, but it was always there. And for me, what's changed in particular is the increasing ability of companies like Good On You, but hundreds of others, to deliver that information to consumers so that it is easier to make the choice. And because nobody's going to be excited about doing something if it's too hard to do. And I think it's really important to always remember that consumers are making a trade-off between their functional needs, other constraints they have, such as how much money's in their wallet, and their sustainability objectives or desires. So more excitingly, I suppose, we have seen quite a lot of specific evidence in the last few years that people are perhaps acting on that underlying desire more frequently. Lyst is a fairly large fashion search platform that people use, LYST, and they reported a 75% increase in searches for sustainable fashion in the 12 months to about February of this year. And a little bit more anecdotally, there's been a lot more talk about sustainability and a few aspects of sustainability post-pandemic, during the pandemic. I was going to say during and after the pandemic, but we're definitely not after yet, are we? And that's played out particularly in a concern about localness. So people have a real I mean, we have, I'd say the two most common requests that users make of us, and we get a reasonable flow of requests. The most common is for particular brands that are not yet listed to be listed. But the second most common this year, but not last year or any previous year, is can you provide more information about brands in my country or my city? And can you make it easier to find those brands? Can you improve the filters, etc., so that we can find the brands that we want that come from that? And that is completely new. That's completely post-pandemic. This kind of real focus on my community. Now, people will express that as a concern about air miles, which is to a very high degree misguided if you look at the LCAs and etc. But you can't tell them that. But they also concerned about the cost of returns and and shipping things back to where they came from, because buying online is a bit of a lottery and people do need to send things back. But I think that it's driven by a concern for local community as much as anything, because that's what's changed, I think, since a year ago. But yeah, so I mean, I think there's a steady growth in sustainability. I think it's really driven by, as much by, I mean, I think there are some extrinsic factors, like, I mean, obviously the concern about climate change, the Extinction Rebellions, the Greta Thunbergs or whatever, and it has got into the consciousness more, the weather events. But I'd also think that it's because it's becoming increasingly easy to act on this concern that people are more interested in paying attention to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that was exactly the purpose and the mission of Good On You in the first place, is to give that information. So it's good to see that it's having an impact, that it is making it easier for people to make those choices. Now, it seems, you touched on the fact that things seem to have accelerated a little bit more last year. Do you think that will continue into 2021?
Well, one thing which has accelerated is related but different, which is the interest of consumers in shopping online, for obvious reasons, stores being closed, particularly in UK and Europe, but also elsewhere. And so there's just massive increases in online shopping. In the UK, roughly speaking, e-commerce grew from high 20s to around about 40% of non-food purchases. In the US, from 17 to 25, something like that. And that's, e-commerce has been growing steadily, but slowly, for 15 years as a percentage of total commerce. But these are massive jumps and very unlikely to wind back. And I mean, I think it probably also plays into that ease of factoring sustainability into your choice, and that you are, shopping in a slightly more relaxed way. You jump between tabs, you have different tools available, including but not limited to Good On You. And so I do think that the mindset is there for the time being. It's very interesting. This is really going off into speculation, but very interesting talks that you can get access to about what happens after pandemics. I mean, we're so much focused on the pandemic. I think it's just starting to see, I think the Bank of England governor came out with something yesterday predicting very strong shifts in behaviour in the opposite direction, from very restrained and careful and so forth, to kind of letting your hair hang down and letting your hair hang down. And that the classic example is the 1919 flu epidemic, and which was preceded, of course, by the First World War, and then was followed by the Roaring Twenties 2 or 3 years later. So looking at fairly serious unemployment for a year or two, but eventually the economy bounces back and behaviour gets a bit wilder. So how that affects sustainability, no idea. It might be, a further boost, or it might be a slowing down of growth, but I think it's really hard to predict the future, of course. Mm-hmm. But anyway, as far as 2021 goes, I can't see any reason not to think that this just won't grow in pretty much the same conditions as 2020. Several years out, who knows?
Fair. Now, it'd be good to talk a little bit more about specifically what the issues are, I guess, in the fashion industry, and specifically what Good On You looks at. Yep. So there's kind of, each brand is rated about labor, environment, and animal welfare. Can you talk a little bit more about what is being considered in each of those three areas?
Sure. So our goal, I guess, is to identify the most material issues for all the most common production methods in fashion. So, of course, in fashion, it means fashion. By fashion, we mean clothing, accessories, and footwear, whether they're fashionable or not, really. And we don't judge your fashion choices. And so I guess what we're trying to do is to look at the typical impacts on animals, labour and environment of the most common types of fashion supply chains and material use. So materials vary from, the most commonly used material in clothing is polyester, and then cotton, and then viscose. Each of those has very serious environmental impacts. Cotton is not the natural harmless material that some people seem to think it is. Huge use of pesticides, 25% of the world's pesticides in growing cotton, huge use of water, huge use of chemicals in transforming little fluffy cotton balls into shiny, shirting fabric or whatever it might be. So it's about thinking about the most common materials and thinking about the most common supply chains, which all vary a little bit. And some people make close to home, particularly in Europe, and to some extent the States. Some people source from supplier countries where labour laws are much different and generally worse. So anyway, to summarise, under sustainability, we look at the climate change impacts, the water impacts, the chemical impacts, and the resource use impacts of the particular brand. And so we have a series of data points that we collect on each brand based on asking questions about what kind of materials they use and what kind of supply chain they have in those 4 headings. For larger brands, we look at about 500 data points across the 3 pillars. For smaller brands, it's a good sight less than that. We sort of understand that there's less control over the supply chain, that smaller brands are often takers rather than setters of terms and conditions in terms of how things are made. Nevertheless, small brands that do well and have sustainability at the core of their. Sorry, can you hear all that noise?
A little bit, but just continue. I think we're fine.
I think they'll settle down in it this week. Yeah. Sorry. Sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, and then in terms of labour, we look at the safety issues, the worker empowerment issues, the living wage issues, and very important here is transparency and traceability of the supply chain, because labour abuses happen not only at the first tier where the clothes are put together in the cut, make, trim stage, but also in the processing of textiles and in the agricultural sector. And obviously it's quite difficult for smaller brands to see that far into their supply chain unless they're using certified materials like fair trade and global organic textile standard materials, but larger brands do have the opportunity to influence their whole supply chain and should.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in terms of, there's a lot, I guess, within each of those areas. Within environment, it could be talking about organic, or it could be talking about the zero water or zero waste. Within labor, there's living wage, there's fair trade. Would you say that any of these areas are going to be of particular focus in the next few years, or things that consumers are really looking at right now?
I think our experience is that I guess there's 2 things. I mean, consumers can get obsessed by a little issue, particularly if it's a particular issue. Definitely when it's in the media, like I think microplastics is an issue that consumers are very switched on about at the moment. So microplastics are the little bits of tiny particles of plastic that come off polyester clothing, nylon clothing, and so forth, particularly when you wash it. And I'm just being given some earphones. If you could just bear with me a moment.
No worries at all.
Hi, hope you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so consumers are pretty focused on microplastics at the moment, and but I guess my impression overall is that a minority of consumers are focused on a particular issue. Like there are some people obviously particularly strongly focused on animal rights issues and want vegan products, but our experience has been that generally people are interested in products which address all the issues, or at least the environmental and sustainability issues, the labour and environmental issues. And so I don't think it's very helpful to get focused on a specific issue. And we certainly mark brands down when all they're doing is looking at one thing, like, there's a child labour certification out there, which is fine, and it does cover off one issue, but if that's all a brand was doing, then they're not going to get a very good high good on you score, because we expect brands to be addressing all the issues that are material to their business.
Yeah, fair, absolutely. Now, Robin has just asked a very good question. What percentage of brands, not just within Good On You, or sorry, not just Good On You partner brands, are taking serious action about modern slavery in their supply chain?
So first I might paint a picture of what the brands that we're involved with at the moment. So our mission is, as I said before, to provide information to consumers about every brand they may be interested in. For me, that means whilst we remain mainly active in Europe, America, and Australia, New Zealand, at least 10,000 brands, and just in clothing, footwear, and accessories, and maybe more. If we were to extend our remit to India and China and other places like Brazil, that number would maybe triple. So at the moment, however, we've only managed to assess about 3,000 brands, 3,200. A few of them have gone out of business since we assessed them. Of those, about 600 or 700 are doing well on sustainability criteria, mostly small brands, a handful of larger brands like Patagonia. How many of them are doing well on modern slavery? That's a really good question, Robin. Hello, Robin. Nice to see you. I can't give you an answer off the top of my head, but I think the answer, my gut feeling is the answer is not very many. Oh, sorry, I just wanted to explain partner brands. So we have assessed 600 or 700 brands as being rated good or great, and we currently partner with maybe about 80 of those. And just to reassure you that our ratings are based on publicly available information with a methodology which in its core features is also public, and so we feel confident that our commercial relations with some of those brands don't affect their ratings. I guess in terms of modern slavery, we're looking at, are you transparent? If you're obliged to sign up, release a modern slavery statement under the California, Australian or UK laws, have you done that? What does it say? But I think it's a really hard thing to track. I mean, I think a really important trend in this area is that, I guess, at a certain time in the past, the only tool that people had was either their own audits or the audits of a certification scheme that they belong to. But I think increasingly people are recognising some limitations in the audit process, and that the better way to, not always possible, but where possible, is to figure out ways to empower workers. So that means looking for brands to respect union rights in their supply chain, looking for brands to have maybe using some of the external systems that are available to empower workers to report abuses to an NGO or even directly to the brand if it's larger. There's a few initiatives in that space. So I'm not giving you a very clear and definite answer, Robin, but I think that's the kinds of issues that I think we're faced in that area.
You just touched on, I guess, how sometimes certifications don't necessarily give you the full picture, but you have quite a background in certifications yourself. So what do you think, I guess, the role of certifications is now and potentially where it might go into the future?
Okay, so my comment was directed more at the auditing process generally. And as we know, there are audits and there are audits, and there are auditors and there are auditors. So, where it's a company engaged auditor and they're giving the audited factory or textile mill notice of the audit, we know the sorts of problems that can come up. So unannounced audits are going to be better. Audits through a recognised third party are going to be better still. So I think the auditing of certification schemes is probably on average better than the auditing of other systems. However, it certainly has been, some issues have been raised. Now, my view is very much that you cannot condemn certification schemes because they have some problems. Everything has problems, and there's to insist on perfection is a recipe for not being good at all. So I don't want to sound like I'm saying the certification schemes don't have a role to play at all. I think they do. And I think there are a range of promising initiatives, although I think they haven't fulfilled their promise yet in terms of blockchain and other, but I think blockchain and similar RFID tracing of products and so forth. But I don't think any of it, as far as I know, none of those are rolling out at scale. in a way that's actually also effective. But I think there are some sort of green shoots in that area. We still put a high value on certifications because we think they're better than alternatives, and they do demonstrate a commitment to doing the right thing and some tools that help do that, and they are not perfect. But I guess I've got confidence that most of those certification schemes, not all, but most of those certification schemes have adequate governance, and they are aware of these problems and they're working on them. So I don't think we should throw out the baby with the bathwater in relation to certification schemes.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a good question from Victoria. In a lot of rating systems, very large fast fashion brands get very good ratings, but smaller, slow fashion brands who may not be doing as much, but are generating less of a negative impact or not exacerbating the fast fashion model. So how does Good On You sort of approach or offset that issue?
Yeah, that's a really good and vexed question. The first thing to say is that there are fast fashion brands and there are fast fashion brands. So quite a few fast fashion brands get the lowest possible rating on Good On You, but a couple of famous ones get a middle tier rating. No fast fashion brands get 4 or 5 on the Good On You rating system. I mean, so I guess the first point that we would say is that we want to make sure that consumers understand that brand X is doing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, a lot of stuff across the thing. I mean, they're doing very bad. They're making no progress at all on living wages, but on many other issues, they are making strong progress, and they are way ahead of brands like Shein and Boohoo and Missguided and so forth, and a fair way ahead of brands like Topshop. And so that difference in performance has to be recognised. That if you have no other choice but to buy, well, it's name names. If you have no other choice but to buy from H&M or Zara, then they're a better choice than Shein or Boohoo. Hopefully, we can tell people that there are better choices still. The other thing to say is that some of the absolutely best brands are small. In Australia, we have a fantastically transparent brand called ABCH, which is a fantastically transparent brand from Melbourne. There are many others. But there are also a lot of brands that think they're sustainable that are really only learning, only doing the basics. And what that may be all they can do, but to, resent the fact that a brand like H&M, which are, signed up, I think they're signed up to science-based targets, but Levi's certainly are, and, full steam ahead on expanding the amount of organics in their range and particularly about recycling and so forth. And then, yes, their progress is relatively small, but they are, making a difference. I mean, what we hear from some of the leading fast fashion brands, not H&M, but another one is that we're the biggest user of organic cotton in the world. So how does that rate? They're pushing us to rate them as 4, but we won't. The other thing to say is that we do look at the business model. We look at the fact that you are promoting excessive consumption and we mark you down for that. So I guess I'm saying 3 things. 1, where a brand is doing a lot of stuff, they need to get credit for that to compare them to a brand that's doing nothing. Secondly, not every small brand that says they're sustainable is doing as well as they should be. And thirdly, we mark large brands down for business models which are unsustainable.
Yeah, great. You touched a little bit there, I guess, on what best practice looks like, I think, as well. Could you expand, I guess, on what the really progressive brands have in common, I guess, not just in the specific initiatives, but sort of how they approach it?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing, that the people who are doing well are the people who said, okay, so there's option 1, which is I'm a fashion brand. Oh, maybe I should be sustainable. And there's option 2, which is say, how can I be the most sustainable brand in the world? So I think the first thing is the mindset. Did you start your business like on Aspire, which is the first one in the world by Bruno Peters in the Netherlands, started 10 years ago and said, we are going to be the most sustainable brand we can be. And Courtney at ABCH has done the same thing. She said, I'm going to be the most transparent brand and I'm going to make, the choices that I make are going to be driven by sustainability. Now, sometimes she's going to have to make compromises, but I think that's the first thing, starting point. The second point, I guess, is knowing everything about your supply chain. And, you know, Courtney takes it to the extent of knowing where the buttons and the thread and the, you know, the minor bits and pieces in her products come from. But definitely for the major elements of your products by mass, you want to know where they're coming from. You want to be able to trace them the whole way through. So I think they're the first two things. And if you do those two things, you're going to work out everything else, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions from the audience? We've had a couple of good ones so far, but please chuck any more into the chat box when you have a chance. But I will ask for now, what, you know, of all of the things, the areas that you've touched on already, what's your number one piece of advice for a small or medium business who either is looking to be more sustainable, as you said, or wants to be the most sustainable brand?
Yeah. I suppose just to build on the previous answer, I mean, obviously not everybody started their business with that as a goal, but some people have come on with I mean, we have seen some businesses who've just reinvented themselves. Like there was an Australian brand who was okay and sort of positioned themselves as sustainable. And then when we rated them and they only got, I think, a good rating, perhaps even not even quite good, this is many years ago, they had a bit of a rethink. Well, I don't know how important our input was, but I know that they went, okay. And they came back a year and a half later, 2 years later, and we assessed them again and they were way, way ahead. Unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly everything they did, but basically they did that thing of saying, well, actually, how can we be sustainable from the ground up? So that's one approach. One approach to say, actually, we really want to be the best. So let's figure out how to do it. And if that means we have to take a bit of time out to think that through and go and investigate suppliers and so forth, then so be it. I'll come back to some of the tips on how you might do that. But at the same time, that's not everybody's way forward, right? Some people will say, I make this stuff and there's a demand for it and I love doing this, but I also want to be sustainable. So what do you do? And I think, again, it's about identifying your biggest impact. So, and probably, small tangent, I think the risk to avoid is focusing only on the things you personally care about. So I think one of the things I see people do is they go, you know, I care about child labour, so I'm going to make sure there's no child labour in my supply chain. And that's fantastic. But you also need to be addressing the other things that are the most material things to your business. And so come back. So I think it always starts with working out what matters the most. So what are the impacts that my business has? I have to understand my supply chain. I have to understand how the materials are made, where they're made, who they're made by, and then how they are turned into clothes, and where those impacts are, and also what happens to them when consumers are using them, and what happens to them when consumers are finished with using them. So thinking about the whole supply chain and where the most material things are. Now, in terms of how do you do that, some people will choose to get advice from people like Sarah, perhaps. Some people will, there are some online services that can provide some useful information. Most of them seem to be not in Australia at the moment. There used to be a business in Australia which specialised in advising fashion brands about how to be more sustainable, but I think the two partners have both moved on to other activities. But people that we think are quite good include this Common Objective as a platform for connecting fashion brands and retailers with a whole range of different services that help people, whether they be suppliers of particular types of products or advisors or so forth. Supply Compass is a little bit more narrow in scope. It's mainly about your supply chain, again, based in the UK, but will work with anyone. In terms of telling your story and helping you assess your impacts and communicate them with consumers. I'm going to forget their name. Green Story, perhaps. I can check that and get back to you. If you're a bit more high end and want Livia Firth to help you out, Eco Age is a consultant who's mainly luxury focused, but can be useful if that's the kind of products that you're making. So there are certainly some advisors and sources of information. I mean, you could start by looking at the overview of how we rate, which lists the kinds of issues and certifications that we look at. On our website under goodonyou.eco, under how we rate, you can see an overview of the issues that we've identified as being most material to fashion. So that's a number of ways that you can start to think about, what to look into in your business.
Fabulous. I'm very quickly trying to pull up those URLs to share with everyone. What else? Oh, and I like how you you touched, when talking about materiality, into actually curiosity. I think that, it's not just focusing on the one thing that you've heard other people talking about, but actually wondering, oh, who is, what's going on in the factories that are making these products? Where are these materials coming from? What is happening to them after my my customers have used them? And I think just being willing to consider that and look into that will show you, I guess, the areas that do need some focus.
Yeah, that's true. Of course, there are also publications that talk about stuff. Business of Fashion now has a very extensive exploration of sustainability. Their focus is a little bit on the larger companies, but I think there are many of the issues are dealt with quite well there. It's behind a paywall, so you have to pay for it. And there are others that, address sustainability issues in fashion one way or another. Fashion United often has stories on sustainability at different levels of detail. Oh yeah, there's another, it's a very good journalist. I'll think her name, Jessica. Yeah, I'll come back to it. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Any other questions from the audience, from anyone that's watching?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I will, unless one pops up, I think we'll close there. I will copy all of those links that Gordon just mentioned into the Facebook group. So if anyone is not yet in the Facebook group, you should have a link in your emails, or you can also go to the Small Mighty CSR Facebook page, and there will be a link into the group. So not the business page, but the group that's associated. It's a private group where everyone can have a chat as part of this session. And so I'll post those links in there so you can explore those resources that Gordon has shared. And you can also share your insights and takeaways from this session and meet some of the other people who have joined us.
Just noticed Tanya's comment about Claire Press's Sustainable Fashion podcast. Absolutely a very good, I've heard some good things. I have listened to some good episodes of that show, so that's another. And there's a few books around, like Fashionopolis is one, and other books by the author of that book, who's I'm not very good with names today, am I? But yeah.
Amazing. And do you ever talk on any of these podcasts? I think Tanya is also asking.
Yeah. So yes, I do. I did one with Sustainable Fashion Forum a little while ago, and Vivify is another company that can source sustainable supplies, mostly focused on China, and they did a podcast I was on. So yes, I do different podcasts from time to time.
I wonder if you might.
Oh, another resource that's really useful is Ellen MacArthur's organisation. I'm having a circularity focused organisation. If you look up Ellen MacArthur for circularity, they did a great podcast with me. They do a lot of podcasts with lots of interesting people. Actually, they tend to be videos rather than podcasts, but they're not focused only on fashion. So I think that's might be useful to many people, is that they're a source of information for on circularity generally. I think they're just called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation now that I think about it.
Yes, that's what I'm finding. And circulytics. I don't know if that was a word that you were coming up with, because that is one of
circularity. So circular economy. So Ellen MacArthur Foundation is one of the leaders in promoting the circular economy. So making sure that everything that is used after we use it is reused in one way or another.
Yes. And the circulytics thing is the most comprehensive circularity measurement tool for companies. There you go. So, all right, that is it. Thank you for all of those fabulous resources. obviously including Good On You itself, which is an amazing resource to learn more about the brands that you're considering purchasing and alternative brands that you might consider. And certainly people might want to continue the conversation with you. I guess they can find you on LinkedIn. Anywhere else?
Me personally, LinkedIn is probably as good as anywhere, or Gordon at goodonu.eco.
Okay, fabulous. All right. Thank you, everyone who's joined us. Thank you very much, Gordon, for your time and for your fabulous insights. Have a lovely day.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.